it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello everyone, so we're back slightly earlier this week with a rather unprecedented Thursday deadline in the offing after another wild weekend in fantasy football, topped off by what we thought would be a banger, Liverpool versus Man United, and turned into a rather soporific affair. Yes, my daughter fell asleep during the game. And I was very close to dropping off as well. But I knew it'd be coming onto pod, so got some naughties indie in my ear and was dancing around like a bit of a lunatic earlier on just to wake myself up. I've got a beer now, so all good. As you can see, if you're watching on YouTube, we're joined this week for our annual Christmas episode with my good friend Mark, aka FPL General. I've never heard of him before, but I hear that he's fairly well known. He's known at FPL General on all platforms. Welcome to the pod, Mark, for your sixth annual appearance. All right?
Yeah, good to be back. My favorite podcast of the year. I always look forward to this one. I was trying to figure out today actually how many consecutive Christmas episodes we've done, and it's definitely at least 5. So we'll do some digging to see if this is the double hat trick. But pleasure to be here and good to meet Sam as well. I've been really enjoying the podcast this season, so it's good to join you guys for this episode.
Yeah, great to have you on, Mark. It's a pleasure to meet you for the first time as well, properly. Obviously, as many fans of FPL have been tracking you and your performances for years. So one of the very first accounts I think I followed when I first created a Twitter account, alongside Tom as well, actually. So it's all come full circle for me, which is a nice early Christmas present. But delighted to have you on. And as always, we are Who Got the Assist. On today's pod, we'll be doing a few tactical pods on our way through Christmas, this whole period, but this is maybe the last chance we've got for us to zoom out a little bit. So we'll be thinking through our plans for both the Christmas period and also how we're beginning to plan for the loss of Salah and Son and co for AFCON and the Asia Cup in January. We've also obviously got some general words of advice about Christmas, the bold claims and listener questions to come. And just so everyone's aware, the podcast is being recorded on Sunday, the 17th of December, after the Liverpool Man United snooze fest finished about 2 hours ago now. So I think bonus points for the majority of games, at least, are in. Yep. So with that, I think we can move on to scores on the doors, right, Tom?
Yes, we can indeed. Obviously, there's OFPL tweeted tonight that the game week is still open, depending on what they decide to do about the Bournemouth-Luton game. So this is all kind of conditional on that in terms of the ranks and the overall scores. Because I know, Mark, you've got Solanke, but still, this is kind of as close as we can get at this time. Now, I listen to your pods, the 59th-minute podcasts, pretty much every week. I listen to both of them, Mark, and both normally in the evenings when I put my daughter to bed. So you are synonymous with screaming in my face. But yeah, I've been following your progress and you've had a really good season thus far, haven't you? I mean, 71k and wildcard also in the pocket too. This must be kind of right on track for expectations, really, maybe even beyond them.
Yeah, I think I'm probably ahead of where I would usually be at this point. Certainly thinking back to some of my best ever seasons, maybe I was around 100k at this point, or slightly better off. But I've certainly come from further back to have really good finishes, top 10k, etc. So it's going very well. I've managed to kind of just fix the weakest link as often as possible without having to play the wild card. And a couple of things have fallen in my favor recently that have allowed me just to hold on to it. So yeah, it's probably going to be a Game Week 19 or Game Week 20 wild card. Things are going well. Things went well this week. I think, it's whatever way things shake out FPL-wise this week, it will be basically a grey arrow or a small green arrow. I've got the Gordon comfort blanket as a first sub if he's needed. Kind of regretted putting him there anyway when I seen him in the starting team. So I took my second -4 of the season this game week. I brought in Saka and Solanke for Haaland and Marvelous Nakamba. So initially I was just going to sell Gordon for Saka, and then I realized I've got loads of cash for Haaland, so I'll keep Gordon for possibly Game Week 18 and Game Week 19. And you never know, he might end up in the 11 at the end of this game week anyway. So basically, like yourself recently, Trippier and Saka were always kind of fearful. I was always fearful of them each weekend. They were always my biggest threat. So Trippier was suspended this week. I brought in Saka with a -4, and I kind of knew things couldn't go too badly because I kind of covered all my bases, and it's kind of a pretty safe approach now until I wildcard, and then maybe you never know, I might get adventurous with 1 or 2 picks.
Cool, nice one. And Sam, I think you and Mark both scored similarly this week, didn't you? Yeah, in fact, dead on the same.
Dead on, yeah. So obviously I don't have Solanke, so mine is very much a final 61 points, well 65 with my second -4 of the season as well, taking out Haaland and finally getting rid of Matty Cash after several weeks of torture from him. So getting rid of him was quite a nice feeling. Pedro Porro coming in for him, 8 points, sneaking those 2 bonus for Spurs, even without an attacking return, was a nice and quite welcome surprise. The one slight annoyance was leaving Lascelles on my bench with the clean sheet there. But overall, I'm pretty happy with the decisions I made. Watkins came in, obviously got the last minute winner or last few minutes winner and maximum bonus there. So pretty happy with that. Got the money in the bank, ready to do a straight swap for Haaland from Darwin in a couple of weeks, hopefully when he's back around game week 19 or 20. But yeah, I'm trying not to be too aggressive with my hits this season. So taking a -4 was reluctant this week, but I feel like it was necessary considering the state my team was in. And I'm quite glad that at least with Cash starting, he didn't go on and get some sort of haul, because then that would have maybe left a little bit of a bad taste in the mouth, knowing that the -4 was mainly to sort out that problem. So yeah, overall pretty happy. But yeah, Lascelles getting the clean sheet was maybe the one dampener on an otherwise pretty nice little green arrow going into game week 18.
Nice one, nice one. And I wasn't too far behind, for 2 points behind you guys. So 63 months for 25k rank rise or so to about 375k ish, something like that. Same as Sam. Porro and Watkins came in for Kabora and Haaland. Another hit, but a nice outcome there in removing a non-playing player in Haaland, an AFCON worry and a weak bench individual, weakest link in Kabore, and strengthening my bench all in one go. The issue is my benchy this week was Saliba. I played White, who got 5 points, got yellow cards. Saliba got 7, which left me 2 points down on both you guys. I do it again, but it's hilarious that Ben White is still creating negative outcomes 5 weeks on from my initial mishap in signing him. So yeah, that's always a fun one to keep an eye on. And elsewhere, yes, big performances by Palmer this week. Watkins coming in, actually scoring, which is all very, very nice. And Gordon getting that assist, which meant that, I didn't feel too bad about benching Saliba. It was really close to the two of them. And Sam, you taught me into playing Gordon, and it could have been more. I think he hit the bar in the first half as well, so it could have been a lot more there. Martinelli and Darwin still stinking up my team. There's a bit of a contrast there, though. Like Martinelli looked very good today, just not getting the points as he has done for the last sort of few weeks. But Darwin looking like an utter donkey, to be honest. I'm very lucky not to get a red card, because he got the yellow card and then started kind of applauding the officials, which this season is scoped to be sent off straight away. So yeah, never again. I'm looking forward to using them both to get Haaland back in a couple of weeks, as we'll discuss. But yes, still going in the right direction, though. I'll take a small green arrow anytime over a red. Right, okay. Shall we move on to, well, quite a lot to talk about this week. I think the first thing maybe is to sort of kind of just do some kind of general sort of Christmas advice before we move into the meteor sort of planning ahead. As I mentioned earlier on, probably the last time during the kind of Christmas period that we more sort of tactical stuff, what we're doing this week and what's just happened, just reacting to that and answering questions. This one's we were able to kind of zoom out and think about it a little bit more. FPL Shoreham, he said, I've got a bit of a broad question, but what have been your most effective strategies in the past over the congested Christmas period, i.e. go aggressive or stay in the peloton? And I think there's a really interesting angle to it this time round with the, I guess, required return of a particular individual in Erling Haaland in most people's cases. I don't think any of us have the cojones to go without Erling, especially if he plays in Saudi Arabia, comes back, has Everton, and then a nice fixture against Sheffield United straight away. But we do have different situations here. As mentioned earlier, Mark's got his wild card, so he's able to manoeuvre a little bit easier to get to Haaland, whereas Sam and I don't have our wild cards to play right now, and I think it's probably one that we wouldn't be looking to activate ASAP. I think it comes around the game 21, doesn't it? I don't think we're spending our wild card then. So yeah, it's an interesting kind of situation, isn't it? And Mark, I guess you're kind of ready to go. I can't see you really sat there on Christmas Day and being able to get away with doing a wild card.
No, unless Mrs. General has one too many sherries on Christmas Day and she KOs, and I've got some unexpected extra time Christmas night, but unlikely. I think this is going to be just one of those occasions for me where real life will probably just come first, and when I've got a choice of whether to wildcard in 19 or 20 anyway, just give myself the extra game week of information, because I don't think it's going to make a huge difference. And obviously, there's a lot of things at play here. I've sold Haaland like many others. And when I did sell him, I kind of looked ahead at the fixtures and I thought, can I survive without him in game week 19 away to Everton? And I think I'm comfortable with that. I think I'd probably captain someone else that week anyway. So I know famous last words, but how much damage can he do to me in one game week? It obviously could be a lot, but I'm willing to just take that risk, go without him for 1 week, and then definitely get him back with a wild card in game week 20 for the Sheffield United fixture. And it's kind of just nicely timed with, we're going to have to deal with Salah and Son around that point. I think around game week 21 they head away. So it's probably a case of maybe getting Haaland back a week later than planned and maybe selling Salah a week ahead of planned, and just hopefully that's not punished too much. So, most likely a wild card to set up for game week 20, losing Salah for the Newcastle game, which gets Haaland back in, and then hopefully leaves me a couple of steps ahead, maybe of those who don't have a wild card, who are maybe scrambling a bit more to get Haaland in, when I can then hopefully focus on a few other targets. So, it's just, having the wild card this long, it just takes the stress away. Haven't really had to think too much about what I'm going to do, because I'll just play that chip 19 or 20 and, figure it out then. So it's been quite nice. It's made these couple of games quite stress-free, because you don't have to think about too much about game week 21 onwards, etc.
No, that's good. That's very nice, isn't it? It's a nice little comfort blanket, basically, to have that. And it's definitely been, I know on your pod every week, you've been like, I could wildcard this week, but I'm not going to. Every week's been like I could do it. I've been thinking about it, but I'm not going to do it. So, yeah, I think holding it this long, you might as well have maximum impact. And I think that the Haaland injury has basically been, I'm not going to call it a gift, because obviously you've had to do a bit of manoeuvring this week and taking a hit, which I know is not your style, but still it's been quite a fortuitous thing to have your wild card in the back pocket. And in contrast, the Sam don't quite have that kind of scenario. And I think that quite a lot of us aren't in that situation. But I think what's really kind of positive about it all is that, for me at least, I've got two useless pieces of rubbish in Darwin and Martinelli, and a buttload of money to be able to spend. So in a strange way, this is me proper upsiding, proper silver lining. Having two pieces of crap in my team means that I can sell them without much regret to get Haaland back in and then get someone else in. But the big miss for me is still Saka, and trying to make that all kind of fit together is going to need a little bit more engineering. I've got a little bit more money on the bench / in the back line than I kind of want at the moment, with 4 viable defenders: Saliba, White, Shimikas and Pedro Porro. So that is a question that I'm going to have to deal with soonish, because I'm obviously going to be selling Salah and Son. So Saka will have to come in for one of them. But kind of there's going to be a lot of kind of reconfiguring that's needed. And that brings me back to, wow, Mark, you're in a great position with having that wild card there, to be honest. I mean, Sam, you've got a similar sort of situation, but I guess less of a less dispersed resources around your team, right? So I guess it's not too hard for you to get Erling back.
Yeah, so I'm fully focused on making sure I maintain that money in the bank, so I can do that in one move in game week 19 or 20, depending on what sort of news and fitness updates we get on him. I do expect him to be back by game week 19, but it's nice to know that I can kick that can down the road one game week further if I need to. What's important for me at this point now is probably just, I think Mark summed it up quite nicely earlier on, which is basically like fix the weakest point in my side. And I've got a few issues that I've been keeping an eye on for a couple of weeks now that are going to become quite quick transfers out soon. Darwin not being an obvious one, but beyond that, I think Turner's probably going to lose his place again pretty soon. I'm considering he was at fault for at least one of the goals by the looks of it. And then Sanchez obviously looks like a keeper that could be out for a little while. So I might need to sort that out pretty imminently. And then in defence as well, I've enjoyed having Lascelles, but Botman coming back off the bench this week probably means Lascelles is living on borrowed time at the moment. The one silver lining there is that Shah might be out for one game week or something with a minor, I think it's a glute injury, which could keep him out for sore bum. Yeah. So he might be out for a game week if I'm lucky, and then I can just start Lascelles one last time before sorting that out. But yeah, I think over the next couple of game weeks, it will basically be quite a cautious approach, just fixing these minutes issues as they're cropping up. Hopefully they don't all occur at once, and I can kind of get set up for the new year with hopefully a strong 15 again, because I'm quite worried about the depth in my side being impacted quite badly with injuries and players coming back in, like Botman, for example. So yeah, that will be where my focus is probably in the next couple of game weeks.
Yeah, I mean that's a good segues us nicely, really, away from Haaland, just to kind of the kind of the general advice. I say that, and then Mark's on, but the general advice that we've got here, really, because it is a hectic time in FPL, and we've obviously just lived through a hectic time in FPL, the 14 to 16, where a rash decision was made by two members of this particular panel and was not made by another member of the panel who has done very well compared to the two of us. But there is, I guess, rotation galore. And there's a kind of a question whether it's kind of more of the same, I suppose, in terms of, as Sam said, focusing on those 90-minute men. And I suppose an advantage of kind of us having lived through a period just now of quite hectic squad rotation is that most of us have tooled up a little bit, so our benches are a bit stronger. I, for example, have now got Saliba as first bench, who's going to be sat there at least next week and maybe the week after. So hopefully we're a bit more resistant to shock now, Mark, would you say? But it's still important, isn't it, to get those 90-minute men in if you do have a transfer to make?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the time of season for 90-minute men as much as possible. And going back to the Haaland thing, it helped me to do a couple of things that I wanted to do for a long time. Number one, get Saka. And probably more importantly, number two was to get a better 12th man, because I've been absolutely winging it this season with no bench whatsoever. I had Gusto out for ages. I had Bayer, who didn't play for the time. And I had Nakamba. So every week I was just relying on 11. And I think there was 2 occasions where I only played 10, which is obviously not optimal. And I hope that never happens again. But again, the Haaland money just allowed me to get a strong 8th attacker, basically. So, Gordon was on my bench this week. And that's the first time this season I've had a very, very strong first sub since, way back in game week 1 or game week 2. So I've been able to tool up with the -4. And again, that's just to hopefully tide me over until I play the wild card. So again, obviously won't have a strong bench game week 18 with a blank, but if I don't wildcard in 19, then at least I'm going to have something decent there if it's needed, which is probably likely because there's been a lot of injuries recently and stuff like that. So yeah, absolutely 90-minute men. And if you have been ignoring your bench like I have been for a long time, when the opportunity arises, get at least one decent option in there.
Yeah, the unholy trinity of Archer, Kabore, and Taylor has been my bench since wildcard in game week 6. It's been painful. Sam, I suppose what's really interesting, though, is during this period, you have to be quite nimble, don't we? Because there are loads of things that chop and change. And with the advent of ITKs permeating FPL, there's going to be kind of a lot of information floating around. And I guess our targets, as we discussed a couple of weeks ago, are going to be shifting around a lot. How much importance do you place on that sort of, I think Shoreham said, do you go aggressive or do you stay in the peloton? I mean, we're not in Mark's rank, but we're doing okay. Would you still advocate just sticking to the conservative players who are the 90, even though they're not kind of, I guess, the lowest owned people in the world? Like you said, you've got a few weakest links to take out. Is it still going to be bringing in players who aren't necessarily going to be, gambly dice players on live FPL, or are you looking to take any sort of risk? I know the answer to that question, but I'm just teeing you up to talk.
I think for me, it's not necessarily about whether or not they're low owned per se. It's more about whether I think they're a minute's risk. Darwin being a terrible example of some poor decision making recently, but generally I try to make sure that, especially at this time of year, like we were saying, get those players in that I know. Okay, it's always a gamble. There's always a risk on whether they're actually going to do the points, but having them on the pitch for as long as possible and not having to worry week in, week out about whether I need to make a transfer on them, unless they get injured, of course, is of prime importance at this time of year. So I don't know about the whole peloton thing at this time of year. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with making sure that you've got some of the more important picks in, but I also don't necessarily mind a gamble on a player that you think has the upside, as long as you don't think it's a gamble on whether or not they're even going to play the match. If you think that they're just as nailed into the side as another player who is high owned, but you think that you can get a little bit of benefit from that player, then I've got nothing against that necessarily. I just think quite a lot of the high owned players at the moment just seem like logical picks with good underlying data, good fixtures. And importantly, they are doing the points. So it's quite easy to sort of end up in the peloton just by making quite logical, quite straightforward FPL decisions at the moment, because these are the players that are probably punishing the people that aren't having them in their side so far. So a lot of people will probably end up with Cole Palmer this week, knowing that he's getting 90 minutes most weeks. He's got great underlying data, great price, great fixtures to come. So I think that it's not necessarily about being different for the sake of it. I would urge a little bit of caution if you think that it's a minutes risk gamble that you're taking rather than a points risk gamble, though.
Yeah, certainly. I suppose we've definitely seen, though, the rise of, I guess, discomfort, I'd say, with buying in who everyone seems to be buying. And I think that can lead people down particular alleys, can't it? And in many cases, blind alleys. Hey, look at me with White and Martinelli. But yes, I think it's definitely worth bearing in mind the idea of compound differentials. We've spoken about a whole lot on this pod in the past, like the idea that your team in of itself is a differential because not everyone's going to have the combination of players that you've got. I mean, Mark, you famously don't really look at ownership at all, and is that something that do you even care about kind of that when you're thinking of buying players in? So, for example, you bought Saka in this week, obviously 80% effective ownership already. Was it even a consideration that I could go somewhere else and take that on, or was it just a case of I feel like he's just a player that I really want to own and that's it?
Yeah, I mean, ownership's something I probably do wrestle with it, to be honest, each season. I do try and fight it off because it's in your face nowadays on podcasts and whatever content you consume, you're going to see it. Even if you're just on X, you're gonna know, even just by your mini leagues, which players are highly owned, which ones are going to hurt you. And when we have such good websites like Live FPL, which I can't resist checking most weekends, the guys that are the threats to you. I mentioned it earlier. I knew Trippier and Saka were going to hurt me week on week if they performed well. But I have always tried to not let ownership influence my decision too much. I'd be lying if I said I ignore it completely because it's impossible to do so, especially if you're a content creator. It's part of the work you do. You have to look at the ownerships and when you're putting articles together and stuff like that. So thinking of the Saka one as an example, which is a good one. I owned Saka in game week 1. I sold him when he was injured, I think game week 8. And I always planned to get him in as soon as I could. There was some slight doubts then, I think around 10 or 11. And I think I held off, had another issue to deal with, didn't want to take a -4. And it's taken me this long to get back to him. Yes, I know his ownership is high because I see what happens to my rank when he scores or he gets an assist. But it wasn't the number one factor in getting him back in. For me, it was, a possible penalty taker, a really good asset, a player I've owned for the most part over the last year and a half. So it was a case of first opportunity to get him back in as soon as possible because I think he's going to score points, not because he's got high ownership. So, of course, it plays a slight factor, especially if you're having a good season. In my mind, I'm going to wildcard soon. So strategically, if I can just consolidate for the next couple of weeks, stay roughly where I am, I'm very happy because my overall goal was top 100k by Christmas anyway. So if it means taking a few strategic moves with ownership in mind, of course I'm going to do that. But only if I think they're good picks who are going to get points as well. So, it's interesting. You mentioned Sam mentioned there, you've got good picks like Gordon and Palmer, cheap picks, good fixtures, high ownership, but they're just good picks. And when I see people thinking, right, I'm not going to get a player X because everyone else has them, that's music to my ears. I'm like, go ahead, get someone else. I'll just have him. I'll get his points because I back him to outscore the player you're bringing in. Good picks are good picks for a reason, and you've got to just always remind yourself of that. And you mentioned the compounding thing there. It might feel like everyone else has the same team, but very likely a lot of your rivals or people close to you in the rankings will be missing one or two of the key guys that you have if you manage your squad well. So I always think of that, I might have 11 optimal picks for my team, whereas a lot of rivals might only have 9 or 10. And as we've seen this season, it can be that one or two players that can make all the difference. So the advice is always don't worry about, what ownership, or don't worry about what other people have, because if you can get 11 strong players, you're going to do well, even if it's just chipping away game week by game week.
Tell me about it. So I'm on the same situation with Saka, but I don't really see a time to do it apart from managing Son and Salah's exit, which is again a really nice segue, Tom, and pat myself on the back for that. Let's go on to that because sound advice over Christmas. don't get too get up on not doing what everyone else is doing. It's fine. Good picks for a reason. It sounds like it's kind of not quite the case getting on the peloton or staying with the peloton, but at least kind of just making logical picks for your team wherever you go. And a bit of planning using FPL.team or something like that, and it never goes miss either. But yes, upcoming game week 21, so not that long away actually. It's the exit of two players who are key parts of the FPL template, who are Son and Salah. Game week 21 looks like to be the time these guys go away. So yeah, as I said, not long away. Mark's got the easy street with the wildcards to start to look at it. Might miss a week maybe of one or two, both of them. But Sam and I have got to do a bit of navigating. I suspect it's probably about 80-20 in terms of managers out there, in terms of where you are with this. I suppose the first question really for me here is it as simple as Salah being quote unquote covered by the likes of Darwin, what a mistake that was, Diaz or Jota, and is it as simple as Son being covered by Richarlison, Brennan or Kulu? Obviously it's hard to know at the moment. There's going to be a bit of evolution, but would it still be the case, Sam, that we'll be looking at just doing straight swaps, do you think, based on what we know now? I mean, obviously we don't know entirely, but based on what we know now, what would your view be there?
So I think each of them I'm going to deal with separately. So with Son, I can see Richarlison as quite a nice, neat little replacement. Obviously registered as the same position in FPL, so it's an easy straight swap. And also the data is improving. He is playing centre forward now, and he's looking like a player who possibly maybe at the start of the season was playing with a little knock. I know that in press conferences, they've mentioned that he was carrying something, maybe wasn't quite at his best. Whereas now he's back in the side, looking like he's going to get very strong minutes for the foreseeable. And yeah, he's played himself into that best starting 11 for Spurs at this point. So I quite like the idea of him as a straight swap for Son. Whereas on the Liverpool side of things, especially having seen today, I'm much less convinced that Darwin can cover Salah. I don't think that's even a discussion at this point. But then Diaz and Jota, if he's even back by that point, I'm also not sure that I'd have them in for Salah as a direct replacement, rather than maybe looking further afield at something a little bit more funky for a couple of weeks. And Martin Odegaard's data has been looking pretty good, and Arsenal have some good fixtures around then. And I'm not tripled up on Arsenal, importantly. And then also Bowen as well is looking really good at a cheaper price too. So there might be a lot of money sort of swirling around in my bank for a couple of weeks whilst I'm waiting for them to come back. But the fixtures for both of those assets do look really promising around that sort of time. And it means that for the period of time that these players are both out, I've got a pretty reliable asset that I've got quite a lot of confidence in for a few weeks at least before I have to hop back to them.
Interesting. I guess it's kind of finding potentially the stand-in talisman effect with these two guys out. And yes, with Son out, maybe you would be looking at Richarlison, see what's going on with everyone else in that team. If he's still, I'm sure he'd then kind of play through the middle, and you have Brennan, maybe Maddison be back, so Kulu would end up back on the flank again. That'd be interesting. With Liverpool though, I do look at the mark and think, well, even though yes, they've been a bit fortuitous, I'm going to say, over the last kind of few weeks, just kind of grinding out the wins after some sort of event has occurred, like against Palace, getting the 2 goals out of nowhere, to be honest. But they are still kind of 0.1 of an XG behind Man City in terms of the team XG. A lot of that is down to Salah, but surely they're going to be individuals who do step up in his absence, no?
Surely there will be. I think it's quite hard to nail down who they're going to be, though, because I think with both teams, there's probably a few candidates rather than one obvious one that's going to step up to the plate when the key guys are gone. So, like Sam, on current information, I'd be kind of inclined to go elsewhere with these replacements when I'm building the wildcard squad. So I'm not going to, directly replace Salah with a Liverpool attacker, for example. Richarlison is certainly emerging again as an option, as he was in game week 1, which didn't go too well for people. But hopefully now he is a more reliable FPL asset. But, kind of thinking about it, when I do wildcard, when you lose Salah and Son, there's definitely opportunities that arise. For example, maybe I treat myself to a more expensive defense for a couple of weeks, but obviously need to be very careful about how I get these players back again as well. So it's going to be a kind of a balancing act. I don't think it's going to be straightforward to build a wildcard squad, because I'm going to have to keep a lot of things in mind that are, you're probably booking in a couple of transfers in a couple of weeks' time, which you don't usually do with a wildcard squad. So going to have to balance the budget and stuff like that as well. But, certainly, hopefully we see players like Szoboszlai maybe appear in a few FPL teams. He's kind of shown glimpses that he could be a very good FPL prospect. Obviously, interesting to see who takes the penalties at both teams when both players are away. We probably won't know that. But again, it's going to be information for us to try and figure out to get an edge there as well. So yeah, it's going to be a very, very interesting time. But at the moment, I was hoping Sam wouldn't mention Odegaard, because he was the first player that came to mind when we moved on to this topic. And again, going back to player ownerships, when you've got a Saka, who a lot of other managers already have, then I like kind of doubling down and getting another piece of that pie. Odegaard alongside Saka for a few weeks. Odegaard's looked fantastic. I was watching the highlights again just before we started. He close to FPL points again this week. So I think he's going to be extremely popular during this period. So yeah, there's plenty of doors that will open that wouldn't usually open.
Just don't get Martinelli. That's what I've got to say. Unless you want to play, who looks very good when he plays, but yeah, a player who's all fart no poo when it comes to FPL thus far, at least. Maybe against Liverpool, he'll surprise me. I know Klopp every year has gone, oh, that Gabriel Martinelli, what a player. So hopefully he's gonna do it again. But I think touching on
he's
that,
also Klopp's also been saying that about Darwin as well. So temper your expectations.
That's very true. That's very true.
Is that damning with fake praise?
I'm never getting rid of that guy, honestly. Right. But I think what's really interesting there, touching on kind of the wildcard situation, and just in general, is that I don't know. When I was thinking about this earlier on, I was wondering whether actually it could be easier than we think, because I think one of the biggest impacts of both these players going away is that we're going to have money to burn, aren't we? Because they're two of the most expensive players in the game, other than Haaland, and I'm not sure we're going to be kind of moving towards having a backline of Trippier and Trent. So I think a lot of us are going to have loads of money in the bank for a little while. I really wish kind of you got like cash interest on your balance or something like that. That'd be so good if you got like extra points for the amount of cash you had in your bank. That'd be amazing. But I don't know. I wonder whether it would be easier than you think. And you've got we've referenced it already. The likes of Gordon and Palmer acting as kind of fabulous enablers. You've got the dark horses that we spoke about last week. Kind of like Tavernier, Doucouré. Fulham have a really good run of fixtures when Salah and Son are away. Chelsea away, Everton at home, Burnley away, Bournemouth and Aston Villa at home. And on loads of fixture tickers, you've got Brighton too, who probably you wouldn't touch with a barge pole a lot of the time. But if you're in this sort of period, as Mark said earlier, where there's loads of doors that are open, they've got the best fixture run during the period when Salah and Son are away. Wolves, Luton, Crystal Palace, Spurs and Sheffield United. I mean, do you think, Sam, we're going to see lots of unorthodox players enter the landscape, like Tavernier, who I still really fancy. I really want that guy in my team.
Yeah, I think for 2 or 3 weeks between 21 and maybe is it 24 when we'd expect most of them back by that sort of point.
Yeah,
I think that's a real opportunity to have a bit of fun with those positions, because it's temporary, and more often than not, you're probably just going to save that money and rather than diversify your funds into other positions in your team. I think barring wildcards like Mark's got, a lot of us will probably be planning ahead, knowing that we need to then reverse that move in a few weeks. So it's basically just a 2 or 3 week trial period with a bit more of a fun player that, again, you might want to know for sure that they're going to start those games at least. But I think there's going to be a spread in who we're all looking at. Odegaard will be popular. Obviously, we've already talked about Bowen, Richarlison, but around that sort of time as well, I'm not sure when KDB is meant to be back, but he might not be a million miles away by that sort of point. Foden as well might be interesting. So yeah, I can see some really differential options popping up, and I think that will spread what the general template looks like in midfield at the very least for a couple of game weeks before we all recede back to type and bring these two players back in, because I don't think too many of us will be braving it without them beyond game week 24, for example.
I think what's really exciting about periods like this is that the template breaks, because I think around Christmas, because we've got all the congestion, we will have a flight to safety. I maybe term it as, where yes, we were talking about it earlier and kind of discussing that individuals may kind of look at it and think, oh, everyone's buying this player, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to be kind of all template about it. But I think there will be a flight to safety, because it will be just a case of trying to make sure that your downside's protected as you go on. But I mean, I think it will be a really interesting period when you do have loads of money kind of floating around, and as you say, Sam, you are able to have a punt on somebody for 2 or 3 weeks. And I don't think we really have that sort of scenario in FPL very often, where you can kind of build in, I'm going to own this individual for a short amount of time, get max value out of that person, hopefully over that time, and then move them back to somebody who's solid. It's a really interesting sort of scenario to be in. It's like I'm off to rent a car for 3 weeks before I go back to my old banger. Mark, during that period, I don't know. It's very anti-you to be anti-template. I'm not calling you a massively template manager, because obviously you don't look at the ownership as much, but you are very kind of good at picking out the individuals who do end up being kind of quote unquote template. Just how crazy are you going to get, do you think? Are you going to be looking at Bournemouth midfielders and Fulham midfielders and things like that?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to have much choice. I think we're going to have to look at them. When you take some of these guys out, we're going to be shopping in places we wouldn't usually shop, which has been the case for me this week doing Christmas shopping. But I'm just thinking as well how tricky it will be actually to get both back in, because you're talking, what's that, about 22 million for the two of them. So obviously we could have a lot of cash sitting in the bank and stuff, but there's going to be headaches as to, let's say both of them end up back in the same game week and you've got one free transfer, and maybe are a little bit short of cash because you've treated yourself to a midfielder. It's not going to be as easy as it sounds right now in reality. And it might come to a point where, do I bring Son back first? Do I bring Salah back first? So it's, and obviously a lot of it will depend on fixtures and stuff like that. But yeah, absolutely going to be a strange time for me as a manager who is a very safe, conservative player and ends up naturally having quite a lot of the highly owned players anyway because of my style of play. So there's probably going to be a few obscure picks. Brighton's a good example. They have the fixtures. I don't think I've owned a Brighton player since game week 1. Fell into the trap of João Pedro.
Oh, João Pedro.
Yeah, it was one of those where I had Mitoma all summer, and then 24 hours before game week 1, João Pedro appeared in a 3-4-3. But it's funny because long-term 3-4-3 worked out quite well with Watkins and Alvarez and stuff like that. Yeah. But anyway, that's a tangent. There will be some picks in midfield that will be in my team that I will be saying to myself, I did not expect you to be here at any point this season. Like Solanke at the moment, he's just appeared for an Erling Haaland, and who knows, a Tavernier could join him for a short period, or an Adingra or a Mitoma, or even Kudus. Kudus has performed very well again this game week. Nobody's going there because we've got Palmer and Gordon, but there's plenty of decent options out there that are just under that, top 6, 7, 8 popular picks.
No, fair play. Right, we've got a couple. I think I'm going to crowbar in a couple of questions here as well, which sort of touch on this before we move on. And the rest of the questions will come towards the end of the pod. The first one is from Dave sees at FPL. How strong should the Christmas bench be? If you had 15 million started from scratch, who would you pick? I don't think we're going to have time to quite do that because we're all kind of looking at each other quizzically. But just kind of in general, how strong should the Christmas bench be? And for me, I've got one kind of player that in normal times would be kind of in the 11 pretty much every week or most weeks, and I'm gonna have to make a decision there. I hate playing like it, but I think it's kind of quite good to have that situation where you're happy to have that guy come on, because there is likely to be 1 or 2 occasions where you're going to have a shock benching of somebody. And then I've got one player, so that's Saliba, and I've got 2 other players who are a little bit cheaper. But if they come on, fine, whatever. But that's kind of it. So it's kind of like a 12th man, as Mark said earlier on. That's kind of the way I look at it. And then kind of the 13th and 14th, they're kind of solidly the 13th and 14th, assuming the backup goalkeeper is the 15th, and that they're benchers. They're there on the bench if needs be. They're playing, but that's kind of it. Sam, is that kind of the same for you?
Yeah, very similar. I classically play with quite a strong 12th man, and that being a 4th defender, usually, because there's usually quite good value in a 4.5 defender, for instance. So most seasons, by the time I get to around the Christmas period, I'll try to have that 4th defender with a good run of fixtures, 4.5, and I'm happy to play them most game weeks around this period of time. Ideally, I would then also have a decent enough 8th attacker. That hasn't really paid off this season with Archer so far. But if you jumped on Palmer early, for instance, at 4.9, then maybe you got lucky and he could have been that 8th attacker that's kind of been promoted to 7th or 6th now. But yeah, ideally, Raul Jimenez, if he hadn't have been sent off, would have been a really good price for an 8th attacker and therefore that 12th man as well. Usually around this time, as long as I've got a starting 4 million defender as well as like an extreme backup, so someone like a Charlie Taylor, that's quite nice to just have in your back pocket in a worst case scenario. But yeah, definitely agreed with you on the 12th man thing. Usually for me, that ends up being that 4th defender. But again, if you want to prioritize that 8th attacker, which might come at a little bit of more of a premium usually, to get someone decent, then I've got no qualms about that either.
Same for you, Mark. Yeah, I mean, with the moves this week, it feels like you're kind of stuck in that sort of same sort of scenario as we are.
Yeah, it's a strong 8th attacker is something I usually don't do. I would traditionally be an Archer kind of manager with a 4.5 for sub striker. But I think just at the moment in the landscape with Haaland gone for most people, and even without Haaland being gone, there's a lot of cheap guys. We've had our Palmers and Gordons this season. It's very viable to have your first sub as an 8th attacker. And given the lack of clean sheets this season, I like that more than kind of a traditional 4.5 defender as the first sub. It's still an absolutely fine strategy. If you went into the next couple of weeks with someone like a Pau Torres, I think that's perfect. As your first sub, you can get something if he's needed. But I think with so many good cheap midfielders in particular, and even players like Cunha at Wolves, if they're your first sub, you can get something if needed. Even Huang as your 8th attacker as well. There's plenty of guys kind of under 6 million that it is viable at the moment. So that's what I'd be trying to do. But don't go out of your way to do it either. Focus on the first 11 first. But yeah, a decent 8th attacker, whether it be midfielder or cheap forward, and then your Newcastle defenders who are cheap, or a Pau Torres or something like that's fine as well. I don't think you necessarily need a third one. But if you're in a scenario where you do have a Charlie Taylor or I've got a buyer, I mean, he's not much good to me, but 2 points can be, quite important come the end of the season. So it's good to have them if they're already there.
Okay, interesting. A final question in this scenario. Do we regret moving Haaland on? I know you don't, Mark, because you've got a wild card, so maybe it's one for Sam and me to kind of reflect on. AMAC says, he's a very expensive asset to play hokey cokey with. We know he blanks game week 18, but in likelihood, he's going to come back for game week 19. So why waste the transfer? I assume that AMAC did obviously keep Haaland, just kind of benched him. It's something that we spoke about last week, the route of cowardice, just to keep Haaland on your bench and kind of manage it. Glad I didn't, because it would have meant I didn't get Watkins this week. Do you regret it, Sam? I don't. I think because obviously having Watkins back was one of the things that we both kind of spoke about a couple of weeks. We've spoken about for a couple of weeks, to the chagrin of everyone listening. Tiny violins have been out. Would it have been viable to have just left him and done other things, or do you think it was kind of an opportunity just to get kind of the downside covered, I suppose, when it comes to Watkins? Because before the outcome with Darwin, who we'll speak about in the questions in a bit, we couldn't have really kind of counted selling him against United, could we?
Yeah, I think Haaland being out from last game week, especially because we got pretty solid confirmation that he would have been out for 17 as well. I think I saw it personally as an opportunity to get back to a forward line, or at least one forward that I'm quite happy with in Ollie. And it kind of solved a bit of an issue for me. And I think because there are a few forwards doing the business at the moment, I wanted to grasp that opportunity for at least 2 game weeks. I think if we knew it was only going to be 1 game week, i.e. the blank in 18, my plan was to bench him. But 2 game weeks as a minimum for him not being around seemed like too much of a gap for me. And knowing that I've got a 1 move strategy to get back to him in 19 or 20, whenever he is actually back, I'm pretty happy with the decision. I don't think it will be difficult for me to get back to him. In fact, I've got about a spare million in case I do want to make moves elsewhere. And I think having that 14 million on the bench for a couple of game weeks means that probably you have a slightly weaker slightly less depth in your squad overall as well. So you might have had to be relying on a 4.5 defender for a couple of weeks at least, for instance, or an 8th attacker, when otherwise you would have probably quite happily had an Ollie Watkins or a Dominic Solanke come in and provide a lot more upside or potential upside for at least 2 game weeks. And again, in my personal scenario, I'm not spreading the funds, so it is just one transfer back to him. So I don't regret it. It is a perfectly viable strategy to keep him on the bench for a couple of game weeks. We did discuss it, but I think in that scenario, you would have had to have a much stronger 12th man than I had and feel much more comfortable with maybe a lack of injuries around your squad. Whereas both myself and you, I think, had one too many other issues elsewhere to have Haaland sat on the bench comfortably for a couple of weeks when we knew he wasn't going to play and we knew that there was a player out there that we wanted to get back in for him pretty quickly.
Yeah, just coming in on that as well. You know, I would have done the exact same thing even if I didn't have a wild card. You just simplify it. You've got a player you're almost certain is going to score 0 points in game week 17, and he's definitely scoring 0 points in game week 18. Just we've got transfers for a reason. You especially the people who maybe did double moves. Where I think Watkins and Solanke were the 2 most popular replacements. They both deliver. People who didn't have Palmer, for example, you use it to get him in as well. People like yourself got Porro in, and a lot of these guys delivered and could even deliver again in game week 18 while Haaland's out. So I think I'm one of the most conservative managers there is out there. So if anyone was going to keep him, if I didn't have a wild card, it would have been me. But I think I would have been exactly the same as you guys. Opportunity. There's lots of good picks out there. And you think about it too, you go into, if you kept them on your bench, you go into 2 game weeks where, your team is worth a lot less than the teams you're playing against for 2 game weeks because you're hoarding that 14 million on your bench. So you straight away, you feel a bit weaker. You're probably missing 1 or 2 guys that some of the others used to get in. So I think it was absolutely justified to let him go. And, we're never too far away from getting him back in anyway.
Yeah, I feel good hearing that. That's for sure.
Yeah,
I'm the same. I was the same as Sam, but basically, and I think Mark, you just shored up exactly what I was about to say. So
you said earlier, Mark doesn't regret selling Haaland, but you can ask me that in game week 19 when I don't have him. That might be a different story.
Yeah, maybe. Right, let's move on to the bold claims very quickly before we get on to more questions. And last week, Sam, you predicted that Darwin scores versus United. And I wish I'd said Watkins returns versus Old Club versus Halls, and then clarified that Hall means 10 points. He's got 9, Sam. But yes, so nothing on the board for either of us this week. For you have gone a bit more esoteric than normal.
Yeah, I've gone for something a bit different. I don't think we've done anything like this in the bold claims so far this season. So I just fancied it for no apparent reason. But I'm going with a pretty big goal fest for this game week coming. Maximum of 2 clean sheets across all fixtures in game week 18. I think there'll be both teams to score across most of the games that I'm looking at. And yeah, I'm going with hopeful lack of clean sheets, and any clean sheets that are kept hopefully are in my team.
Villa versus Sheffield United, maybe Villa, and Newcastle versus Luton, maybe Newcastle. I guess maybe that. I don't know. Fair play. I'm gone a bit big. I've gone for Luton to beat Newcastle. Maybe I've been listening to James and Planet FPL for far too long this season, but he's been tipping one team to really be beaten by surprise at the Kenny at Kenilworth Road. Now, I wonder whether Newcastle are a good candidate for that, with injuries galore. I suspect the Carabao Cup is going to be meaningful to them, especially with them losing out in the Champions League. So maybe they'll arrive at Kenilworth Road with a mixture of expecting to win and also quite knackered. So they have been knackered for a little while. Aided and abetted by Jimenez. I'm not even sure what we can call that. Is it a rugby tackle? Is it a wrestling move?
Karate kick.
I'm not sure what he was doing. It wasn't a Cantona. He kind of jumped. It was like a mosh pit sort of thing. He just kind of jumped into the guy, didn't he? But aided and abetted by that. So I don't know. I've got an inkling that Luton are going to beat Newcastle. I'm also going to predict that in my prediction league game as well. So that's my bold claim for this week. And if that comes through, I'm going to expect 2 points, Sam. Thank you very much. Let's move on. Right. Okay. Lots of questions this week. I wonder why. But thank you so much for those who have sent us questions. We'll answer the majority of them. There are a few that are really team specific, which we're not going to be able to get to here. But I'll write a reply if I can. The first one actually is Maxwell, who asks, where do we value Trent compared to midfielders of a similar value? And I think this kind of touches on quite a few things that we've spoken about independently and together over the last few years in terms of what Trent offers as an individual. He's now the top scoring defender with 84 points. He's overtaken Trippier this week. Good performance against United. He's got the 9 points, so he got the free bonus. And the only player looked like he gave a crap, to be honest, for Liverpool for the majority of the game. 8.2 is how much he costs now, Mark. A player who maybe could come into consideration for you on a wild card?
Yeah, definitely. I've kind of been thinking recently, is Trent a bit of a blind spot for me this season, and maybe for others as well. We've been spoiled for choice with midfielders. And you only go back about 6 months, a year ago, Trent was an auto pick always, no matter what. At 7 million, 7.5, or whatever he was. Yes, didn't start the season too well this year, and when we had Trippier performing so well at a cheaper price, now we've got Porro. When you've got Haaland, Salah, and Son, when we did have Haaland, it was extremely hard to justify Trent as well with those guys. But again, talking about doors opening with a wild card, Trent is certainly one of those that I will explore. And is he? You talk about players like Darwin covering Salah. It's probably more so, can Trent cover him while he's away, and can he step up and not even just step up, just continue doing what he's doing? Because there you go, a good example against United, 9-pointer, nice and easy, doesn't even have to do anything, just turns up, plays, keeps a clean sheet. 9 points is a lot in this game week. If you have him, you're probably looking at a green arrow by just owning him. If you've got a few of the other key assets. So very much in my thoughts now, hasn't been really at all this season. I've always been someone who would have said Trippier over Trent. But I'm starting to kind of rate them both a lot more closely now, and maybe even Trent higher. And if I can make it work, it's certainly something I'm going to look at when there's no Son and Salah, hoovering up all the budget. The thing will be just being careful about not putting too much into defence and getting back there, because that's always the tricky part.
Yeah, the temptation might be that you go, oh, you know what? Trippier is an amazing attacking asset, and so is Trent. But then when it rolls around, as we spoke about earlier on, when Son and Salah are back now, that's kind of 3 transfers to make, and it gets really, really sketchy. Sam, what about you? I mean, we both kind of, during the pricing pod, we were both kind of saying, oh, initially we thought this is great to see Trent actually priced high. And then subsequently we've reflected, he's completely out of consideration because he's priced so high. But those who have gone there, especially with the haul of money, or maybe kind of as a differential and an ultra differential over the last few weeks, which is something which has been unimaginable over the last few years, that we wouldn't really be seeing Trent in teams, maybe kind of as a result of the pricing landscape. Is he a player who potentially, against midfielders, I suppose, at the kind of the 8 million mark, measures up as being a player who could be in consideration for us, actually?
Yeah, I mean, he definitely is in consideration. I think it's more of a structural problem as well with our teams. And point for point, he's doing as well, if not better, than most of the midfielders at his price point, and almost all of the forwards as well. But I think what you also have to consider with a player like Trent is, yes, he is getting the points, but there are also defenders at 4 million to 4.5 million who are getting 3/4 of the points that he's able to get. So you can still bank that extra money. Whereas in midfield and up front, that sort of price drop off doesn't match up to the same amount of points, if that makes sense. So you're probably, if you're sacrificing 3 or 4 million from an asset in midfield, other than maybe 1 or 2 of the key guys we've got in Palmer or possibly Gordon, then you're not really able to find someone who's able to cover him off as well. And I think in defense, that mainly comes from the fact that any defender in the same team will at least get the clean sheet points if they're also getting the 90 minutes. So I mentioned it on Trippier quite a few weeks back when we were wildcarding. I think it was around game week 8. And yes, it is horrible going without a player that is potentially explosive and will outperform any other defender in his team. But you can also cover off a section of their points every single week, as long as you've also got a starting defender in that team. And at the moment, we've got Tsimikas for an undefined amount of time. You can also cover him off in a couple of other ways, potentially as well, for less money. And there are also other defenders cheaper getting attacking returns too. So as much as I love Trent, I am going to explore it. But from a structural point of view, right now, I feel that the value is better spent in the midfield and up front, because if I'm spending that value in defence, there's only a limited selection of those players in midfield and up front that could cover off the points well enough that I'd otherwise be losing out on. So yeah, I mean, I love Trent. Most seasons he would be an auto pick in my starting 11, but this season I think just that extra little price hike and the fact that he's not quite getting as many attacking returns as he has done in other seasons gone by, and the data isn't quite as good as it has been in other seasons as well, I don't believe either. So for now, and probably until I wildcard, I'm probably reluctantly going to have to swerve him from a structural point of view, and I'm probably going to be too scared to go there when Salah goes off, because then it's effectively 2 transfers to get back to Mo or Son, whereas other people might be more willing to use a wild card around that time to rebalance the squad. But yeah, for me, it's a difficult one because I love him. I just don't think I can get to him at the moment based on the squad structure I've got.
Yeah, I think I pretty much echo that. I mean, yes, I think you look at the midfielders around the same price as him, and they're all performing kind of commensurate. And if Trent was outperforming them, then I'd certainly be looking at one of the, a Trent over one of them. Trent's an 84 at the moment. I mean, you've got Bowen, who is 7.7, I'm going to say, and I think he's on kind of in the 90s, that's for sure. You've got Gordon kind of just outside of the 90s, 89, and then you've got players like Hwang, you've got Sterling, you've got Palmer hasn't been playing since the start of the season, but he's up in the 70s now, and loads of players in the midfield who are a lot cheaper, who are still kind of able to quote unquote cover what Trent's output is. And I think a lot of what's going on with Trent is that he's missing that sort of perfect storm to make you want to bring him in, which is a great run of fixtures. And that's not really on the horizon. There's Arsenal next, and there's a game against Burnley on Boxing Day, and then there's Newcastle, and then there's Bournemouth, and there's Chelsea. So arguably Burnley, Bournemouth, and Chelsea are okay fixtures. Then you've got Arsenal again, and it doesn't. There's never really a period where it looks amazing. Maybe 24, 27, Burnley, Brentford, Luton, and Nottingham Forest. But then you're kind of looking again at bringing Son and Salah back. So I don't know, but there's never really a period that lends itself to Trent. Ultimate luxury differential is how I look at him now, which is sad because obviously same as you, and I'm sure the same for you, Mark, because we've all had him in our teams for a long time. I think I remember tweeting many years ago, I think it must have been 2018-19 season, we'll always remember having Trent at 5.0 because of what an amazing individual he is. Twice a double 200 club member. I'm sure he may get near to it this year. But I don't know. I think he's one that you love and leave just because he's just too expensive. And it's interesting to see. It was interesting to see that when Szoboszlai got subbed off, then he moved into midfield and then kind of was able to kind of give us a little bit more really of what Trent is. And I don't know. There's something about it at the moment that doesn't really quite make sense. And I think the ownership as well will always be low enough. I know we don't like that, but it's worth mentioning that the ownership is always going to be low enough that it's not going to be as painful as Trippier, for example, was. And Trippier was just that little bit more gettable than Trent is at his price. So one where, if you go there, completely understand why, completely kind of get it, but it's just not quite there, I think, given the fact that the midfield options are there for you and even the striker options are there for you. Even if we lose Salah and Son, it's still going to be a case of really thinking about it and probably only having him for a couple of weeks before maneuvering him out again. Next question, Nathan Jacobson, best goalkeeper over the next few weeks. This affects all three of us. Johnson owner Mark and Sam and I have both bought in Sanchez last week, which has obviously gone really well. Knee specialist he's seeing. Do we just buy Dubravka, he says, and not overthink things, or is there anywhere else we could possibly go? I mean, all three of us, I think, are relying on Turner to play this week, unless someone's making a goalkeeper transfer, which is probably quite low on my list of priorities. I don't know about, but I don't know about you, Mark. Is there anything you're looking at the moment?
It's a funny one. I get asked every week on the podcast, who is the best goalkeeper this season, or who's the best goalkeeper combo for the next couple of weeks, and you end up just skipping it these days because I think I give a different answer every week, and it's probably just recency bias. I think I said Leno last week and Neto, but I'm pretty sure both of them conceded this week, didn't they? Or did Leno? I can't even remember. But basically there's no standout. There's no Emi Martinez of this season. It looked like it might be Emi Martinez himself a week or two ago, but again, he didn't do the business this week either. So I'm in trouble goalkeeper wise. I've got Johnston. Henderson had a good game, even if Johnston recovers. Turner was disastrous. I watched the Tottenham game as a Son and Porro owner and a Turner owner. I kind of forgot until about halfway through the game that I had him. Then I seen him make that mistake, and I was like, that's not good. Kulusevski scored. I don't have him, but I also have Turner. That's definitely not good because I could be without a goalkeeper this week because surely that performance puts his place at risk now. So I'm not against a goalkeeper transfer, not something I would like to do 2 weeks before wildcard activation. But if I look at my team on Thursday and if it is my weakest link, I probably will do it. But then the question still is, who on earth do you go for? For me, it probably is just Dubravka, because I know there's doubts over him in January if they send another goalkeeper, but I don't need to worry about that because I will have a different goalkeeper in January anyway in my FPL team. Yeah. So I do think Dubravka is still okay short term. I'm not sure I would recommend him as a long-term pick. And it's still probably your likes of your Lenos, your Pickfords, even still a Neto, just, somewhere between 4.4, 4.7. I'm still not willing to go to an Ederson type or an Alisson type, more so for, blocking other outfield picks in those teams. Ederson doesn't keep clean sheets anyway, as some of the analytics crew got to experience again this week. I think, did he get a 0-pointer with a yellow card? So goalkeepers is a nightmare. I've just been winging it again with Johnston. He's been blanking anyway, 7 or 8 blanks in his 9 fixtures before he got injured. So I may make a move for Dubravka this week, but I'm hoping I don't need to do that, and hopefully Turner can just play. But who knows? That's one for me to figure out on Thursday.
Yeah, I know the feeling. I think it's one of those where I probably will. It's one of those where if I've got 2 free transfers, I'll use one of the transfers on the goalkeeper. Otherwise, I'm just, I don't know. It feels like a opportunity cost sort of thing where if I use transfer on the goalkeeper and I lose that flexibility, I'm not too sure about it. I'm going to bring in a question from FPL Antiques here, who mentioned that Everton have a frustrating schedule with no really good long-term fixtures until game week 32. Well, they're worth buying into anyway. Pickford is a goalkeeper who's got 4 clean sheets in a row. In that time frame, he's scored 30 points in 4 game weeks. But next 2 games are Spurs and Man City. But he is at 4.4, and could be one of those individuals that someone like who isn't able to kind of refresh our team very early on, like me and Sam, could be looking at. Everton, as we spoke about last week, are 6th for XGC, as in 6th best. So that could be a player that you'd be looking at bringing in potentially in the goalkeeper sort of area. Just set and forget. Yeah, they are what they are, but there are lots of times where beating Newcastle, beating Chelsea recently, they are going to get those results every now and again. And if not, Pickford is going to be making saves. The saves have been fairly decent this year in terms of overall distribution. But it's not. We spoke about last week, Sam. It's not really something we want to be thinking about. And it kind of just feels to me that maybe I'll leave it this week. I think about transfers and captains already, but maybe I'll leave it this week. Next we make a goalkeeper transfer in the week after, buy Haaland back. It kind of feels that sort of way at the moment, where if I've got a spare transfer, I'll sort it out. If not, I'll either kind of I will always hope Turner keeps his spot somehow. Still got 4 saves. Maybe maybe Cooper's just looking at FPL and not really watching the goalkeeper play. There were loads of mistakes in there, weren't there? What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, I'm not holding out too much hope that Turner starts after that performance either. Maybe we pray to some sort of deity that Sanchez comes back and he's fit somehow for this game week. It doesn't look likely considering he's off at a specialist, but outside of that, it is a bit of a desolate wasteland for keepers at the moment. And I really don't want to, if I've got any other moves to make in my side, and because I'll only have 1 free transfer, I don't think any keeper I'm looking at for this week is going to necessarily be worth a -4. So I just feel like I'll risk it on Turner maybe getting some minutes this game week. Obviously, if there are no other issues and I've got that 1 free transfer to use, then I could look at making that keeper transfer. But then looking around, there's not really many that I'm even slightly tempted by. The only one that, if they didn't have such a bad fixture this game week, I would be slightly more tempted in although it would block me from another Arsenal asset, is Raya, because he's been pretty good since he came in for Arsenal. Doesn't look like he's losing his place anytime soon. The next Arsenal-Brentford clash, I think, is game week 28. So he's got quite a few weeks before we have to worry about him missing a match as well. But he's I think 4.9 now, so on the expensive side for a keeper. Outside of that, Anana maybe, but the fixtures aren't great, and you just never really trust the clean sheets there, even though they are sort of ticking over clean sheet wise. Then maybe after that Martinez, but again, he's on the expensive side. I've really got nowhere I'd look at the moment other than maybe Dubravka for a couple of weeks, but because we don't have the wild card in our back pocket,
we can't go there, can we? Really?
Not really, unless we sold. So one option I am exploring is selling Turner for Dubravka. Then I only have to worry about him for a couple of weeks, and then hopefully Sanchez is back by the time that's a problem. So that is one angle I'm potentially exploring, because that shores me up for a couple of game weeks, and then hopefully Sanchez is back by the time Dubravka potentially loses his place anyway. But yeah, in theory, I don't want to have to be making a transfer on a goalkeeper again, having just done so, and especially not for a -4. So we'll see how the week pans out even. But for the time being, I'm really hoping that Chelsea get Sanchez back fit again, and I can rely on him ASAP.
Fair. I mean, see what happens with Petrovic. Obviously, kept clean sheet against Sheffield United. With a knee problem and unknown, I think Chelsea are quite nebulous about when the player's back anyway. And I don't know. It's one of those I think we're going to have to solve sooner rather than later, because, I mean, as Mark mentions, it wasn't the best performance by Turner. I can imagine this week we're going to not have a goalkeeper, and then the week after in game week 19, probably going to be looking at having to sort that out. And I know I part of me just thinks, I'm just going to just shove Pickford in as the cheapest goalkeeper who's got good data, and just leave it be. It's not sexy. It's not pretty. No goalkeeper transfer ever is. Maybe if there's a kind of a Man City double game week on the horizon, I would look at Edison. No, I wouldn't. No, I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, never going there again. Bit like Darwin Nunez, who I think we should probably mention here. FPL Kudos asks, where does Darwin rank in the history of the worst FPL picks ever in terms of Twitter hype versus reality? And I remember a young man before the season. I don't know, Sam, do you remember this? Who gave a bold claim for the season that Darwin would score 20 plus goals.
It's called bold claims for a reason, Tom.
Yeah.
I mean, the data was always good, so I thought I'd take a shot at it. It doesn't look like it's coming off at all, and I'll say it every single week. There is a player in there, but he needs to be so much more well-tempered. He needs to get his shooting boots on. He needs to be consistent. It could happen for him in a Liverpool shirt. It might not ever at this point. He's been there a season and a half, so maybe it's just one of those players that is just going to underperform the underlying data forever. He's extremely frustrating to watch. He seemingly just misses all of the easiest chances that he's given at the moment. So, yeah, I mean, the bold claim is not looking good at this point. There was a moment earlier on in the season where I felt a little bit more confident. I was like, I think it was after the Newcastle game when he netted twice, like sensationally as well. I think he came on from the bench and he looked phenomenal, but that has just been fits and starts and not really ever consistently strung those performances together. So yeah, I'm more than willing to give up on that bold claim halfway through the season already.
Fair play. I mean, Mark, before we get to you, I'm going to bring in Luan Delay as well, who asked, how do we escape groupthink from content creators while sort of listening to them? I think you were quite good in terms of being insulated from that. You just kind of thought, you know what, I'm just going to, if in doubt, do now, leave it, not buying Darwin, leave Watkins there, and you got the benefit from it. Do you think this is pervasive in FPL in terms of just, me and Sam talking about it, but you see everyone kind of posting their teams before the deadline, and you think, everyone's going there. Well, maybe I should. And I think that to our discredit, Sam and I maybe both were slightly influenced by that. So how do we escape this groupthink while still listening to content creators that we love?
Yeah, it's really difficult. I think it's the nature of the game nowadays. You know, so many people are kind of guided by who they listen to and they watch and stuff like that. And even subconsciously, they might not think they're making a move because of something they've heard or read, or the whole group think, or the following the sheep or the herd or whatever. But it happens, and I think this week highlighted it to me with Solanke, because I think I read that Solanke got 1 million new owners, which is absolutely insane in game week 16, game week 17 of a season, when you think a lot of people have already stopped playing the game. To get 1 million new signings it blew my mind. Obviously a decent pick, good fixtures, having a good season, but he plays for Bournemouth, and of course there's other options out there as well. So that was a big one for me in terms of the whole groupthink thing, and kind of where FPL is nowadays. That once, a couple of years ago, even 4 or 5 years ago, you'd have a bandwagon and a few people would jump on, but now basically nobody gets left behind. And often those that do get left behind end up getting run over by that train, because quite often they are good picks for a good reason and they end up doing well. But yeah, and you've got the Darwin example, and I thinking back to when that opportunity arose to get Darwin for Watkins, I think I was in many ways I was just lucky that I had something else to deal with, because I think I had a midfielder injury. So for me, it would have been a -4. And people will know by now, it takes a lot for me to take a -4. Only taken 2 all season. So my kind of conservative approach, which I kind of put into play almost every game week, and over the long term, it helps you to avoid these scenarios. But I'm not saying it was a good idea to avoid them, because even I remember going into this season like Sam, thinking this could be a big season for Darwin Núñez. And from what I've seen so far, I fancy him to actually put it all together this year, and with Klopp to figure it out and actually score the goals. And I just feel like I've dodged a bullet in many ways, because I could have easily been there as well if I didn't have, I don't know if it was Bowen or Madison or somebody. I had something to deal with that week, and that's why I didn't do it. If it was a free transfer, I think I probably would have. And again, another factor in that was I was on Ollie Watkins from game week 1, so I'm very loyal. If a player's done well for me, it takes a lot for me to sell them. Villa are playing well, Watkins is playing well, so it was easy for me to keep, even though the fixtures might have not have been brilliant on paper. So there was a lot of things at play there, and I certainly didn't expect it to play out the way it has, with Darwin doing absolutely nothing.
No, it's yeah. I mean, we've both been guilty. I think it's you always get kind of the questions, or at least you get the comments. Oh, content creators always say that blah 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 is really good, and when they won't do anything, they're silent on it. Sam and I are both equally guilty. I think maybe I'm going to blame Sam more, just use the bold claim, but we're both equally guilty of laying down the fact that Darwin obviously had the numbers to make him into what looked like on paper a very good pick, but it's just the case that we both got eyes. We can both see that yes, the non-pen XGI per 90 is pretty prodigious, but it's just not quite worked out. But yeah, no, I completely take on board what you're saying, and to be honest, I think we probably both, as we said a few weeks ago, probably not do it again if we had our time again. I think we would have both wanted more time to make the decision, and maybe not have been sat looking at everything at the time of making a decision and executing that decision. And maybe that kind of had a little bit of an impact. But yes, it's definitely one that it's an isolated sort of decision, isn't it? Because as you kind of infer, Mark, I mean, a lot of the time, content creators, including us, are making judgments and kind of giving advice or opinions, at least in our case, which are evidence. They are reasoned. And with Darwin, there was evidence, there was reason behind why we went with him. It didn't work out. And I think that, yes, if you've kind of watched him and not really looked at the data, then that would make complete sense why it's been an absolute screw up. But equally, there was definitely some modicum of a foundation of reality behind why I went with him. So I think, yeah, there's regret, but there's kind of equally looking at the big chances missed, looking at every kind of little moment where he could have been played in, where he hesitated when he could have shot, when all these sort of things happened, where it could have worked out differently. And so, yeah, it's always one that's quite difficult. And in terms of kind of just trying to insulate yourself from negativity, I suppose, negative decisions, trying to listen to content creators, is we always say it, just make sure that you do your own research through delay and do your own thing too, and don't be afraid, as Mark said earlier on when he was talking about his views on ownership, to think, well, okay, I see what everyone else is doing, but here's what I think. And I think the most satisfying moments in FPL are when you go with what you think compared to what everyone else thinks, and that goes well. I'm not saying that's going to happen all the time, but normally, unless you're selling Salah before he scored a hat trick or something like that, normally it's not going to hurt you too much if it goes wrong, and it will be a massive benefit if it goes right. And those are the most satisfying moments, I think, when they do go right, when you have gone against the group thing. So just kind of do your own thing and have your own sort of kind of space outside of what content creators are saying, outside of what social media is saying.
Just on that, Tom, as well, it made me think about it when you were saying it, just to have your own space and your own kind of ideas. I've always done it, just a watch list on the FPL website. I always keep it quite small, and I will never buy a player. When I make my transfers on a Thursday or Friday, I only ever buy from the watch list. So if I'm not feeling it with Darwin and he's not on the watch list, if a bandwagon takes off, I won't buy him because he's not there. And I'm thinking about a recent example. Last week, I added Kulusevski and Brennan Johnson to the watch list, and I didn't add Richarlison, maybe because of previous experiences and stuff like that. But I'm a little bit more reluctant to go for Richarlison, maybe as others will jump on him more quickly than I will. But that's a good example. If let's say Richarlison got 1 million new buys last week, like Solanke did, I wouldn't have bought him because he wasn't on my watch list. So it might mean I'm a week later to the party, but it helps me to avoid the whole groupthink thing. And I'm really just tunnel visioned on those players that I want to buy soon. And if I miss a player by a week or two, I'm not going to lose any sleep over that. So it just helps you to kind of, maybe that's a way of kind of blocking out the noise on certain players.
Yeah, the eye test is also quite key, isn't it, Sam, on that sort of thing? Because, I mean, Richarlison, for me, I went with Kulusevski when I had the choice a few weeks ago, because I see Kulusevski, I know that he's not potentially the best in front of goal, but I kind of see him as being a better player almost. And I felt that there were more sort of routes with assists, or hopefully some sort of curled in delicious long shot, compared to Richarlison, who I owned in the past and played for Everton that year when Dominic Calvert-Lewin was really on fire. And I knew Richarlison was misfiring everywhere, and I owned him that time. And it kind of stays in your mind, doesn't it, almost from kind of what you see with your eye, which I know a lot of people don't like, but it's still quite valid to some extent. And kind of touch on what Mark is saying as well. It meant that Richarlison was never a kind of on my watch list, and never became kind of a mental watch list, that is, and never kind of became part of any sort of discussion I had at that point. I suppose that's important, isn't it, still?
Yeah, and I think that plays into our guts as FPL managers. And one of my favorite sayings, I suppose, I guess it's a quote, but I don't know the exact quote, is like the gut feeling is much stronger for people who have played this game for a lot longer, or done something specific for a long period of time. They've got loads of experience in it. So whether or not they consciously know why they think that something is right or wrong, because of all of their years of experience in something, they know just through gut feeling that a player is going to be good or bad, or maybe there's something off with them. Whereas I think there's also something to mention here on sort of the flip side, which is always be open to the eye test also changing your mind over time as well. So I think at the start of the season, what you've just said about Richarlison was completely valid. However, in probably the last couple of game weeks, I think he has actually, just to the eye, looked a lot sharper. He's been getting into those spaces at the right time, finding those pockets of space in the box, and just looks like a player that is free from injury. All of a sudden, he looks much more mobile. His turn of pace has improved. So I am open to changing my mind on him. Whereas in the past, I think earlier on this season, he wouldn't have ever appeared on my watch list either, based on what, not only the data, but also what we're seeing with our own eyes and the experiences we've had with him. But players can change, and the data will take a while to catch up. But I think Richarlison's one that I'm open to potentially changing my mind on over the next couple of weeks.
I think I can't remember who said it, but the quote that always sticks in mind for me when it comes to FPL is strong opinions loosely held. And I think that's very strong when it comes to Ollie Watkins, for example. Like, I remember a few years ago, I'm not going to name them, but there was a FPL account who wrote, Ollie Watkins can believe in your dreams and you too can become an England striker. Because I think there was a perception fairly. And that was the season where he scored 168 points, I think, in 2021, his first year for in the Premier League. Where a lot of people who looked at him and just thought, he doesn't do anything. And I think there's definitely something that we reflect on the podcast as well. That Wally Watkins misses a lot, blah blah blah. But I think that holding fast to opinions can mean that you end up down rabbit holes, and you can end up kind of, I suppose, sort of creating that sort of sunk cost that we speak about a lot about a certain player, and you back yourself into a cul-de-sac, into a corner. And it's good to be able to kind of not do that. Yes, okay, you might not like a player very much, as in a football sense, but in FPL sense, you've got to be open to the fact that a player can flower, or a player can, under a certain manager, a certain system, suddenly out of nowhere become a player who's suddenly in your team. And I don't think it kind of does anyone any good if you kind of hold fast to kind of older ideas about what a player is, because there are those people who look at Watkins, for example, and think, "Oh, not for me. He's a bad finisher, etc., etc." But I mean, the data doesn't lie this year and hasn't lied for the last few years. So, yeah, interesting. All right, I'm aware what time it is. So, should we move on to transfers and captains and see what we're doing this week, Sam?
Yeah, I think your team's first up this week, Tom.
God, too much of me. All right. So I'm torn. So Mark was saying about goalkeeper transfer earlier on, but I know he's got a wild card, so it's probably a slightly different scenario for me. I've got Turner versus Bournemouth, and I think there's a 50-50 chance of best of him playing. But the rest of the team's kind of all right. And we've got Porro, Shimikas at home to Arsenal. Yeah, White. I'm playing White over Saliba again, but I think that he's got more upside. So I think I'll be playing him over Saliba again. Gordon, Martinelli, I've got to keep him for Liverpool. I think I feel like Martinelli, there's always going to be, I've got to keep him for X, Y, and Z, but he'll go eventually. Palmer, Salah and Son, who's the vice, and then Darwin. I think he gets one more ride, honestly, again, and Ollie Watkins probably the standout captain. And things I could do, I could sell Darwin, I could move a goalkeeper on, but I don't know. I just kind of feel like it might be worth a bit of a roll, especially because the Thursday deadline. I think that's going to be quite big. We're going to get a smaller amount of press conferences before the game is effectively live. There's going to be lots that's going to be going on. May well get the Aston Villa press conference. I'm sure we will, but I'm sure probably, unless we hear something kind of has really gone down about Watkins, I'm pretty sure we'll probably be all right there. And I know it feels like it lends itself to an if in doubt, do nout situation this game week. I mean, as I said, there are things I could do, but I've got to kind of be mindful of the fact that I want to be getting Haaland back, maybe even in game week 19, by selling the no-hopers, aka Martinelli and Darwin. So having 2 free transfers with the Haaland plan in place probably makes a lot of sense. And I'll see what happens with the goalkeeper, but at the end of the day, it's not mission critical to be removing either of those. So it may well be a role for me. Leave it, and then, God, on Christmas Day, towards the end, when I'm sozzled, full of Christmas food, probably I think coma toast on the cheese board. I'm buying loads of cheese this year, Sam. It's gonna be amazing. But yes,
Nice.
coma toast on the cheese board. Having that last beer that no one should be having, but I'm gonna have. I think at that point I'll get my phone out and be like, well, I'm gonna make some transfers, and hopefully next week, Sam, on Saturday, we're gonna be in a place where we can advise each other on what we're going to be doing. But yeah, I think that's probably going to be me. I don't know. We'll see what happens this week and everything that goes on. I know there's a Carabao Cup, etc., etc. But I'm minded to roll right now, given the fact that we're not going to have any news apart from ITK news, which is the worst sort of news. So yeah, that's kind of where I am.
Okay, cool. I'm next up. So yeah, similar to you with the goalkeeper issue, only 1 free transfer. So I'll only make that maneuver if there's nothing else I need to do. I probably am more willing to make that maneuver for free this week, rather than necessarily save a transfer and roll into game week 19, because I can do that Haaland move in 1. So again, ideally I would roll. That would be fantastic. But I feel like there might be 1 or 2 issues that I could resolve this week. I think Lascelles, if I'm lucky, gets the Luton game due to the Shah potential injury. But worst case scenario, if he doesn't play, then Saliba or Taylor can come in. Obviously, Taylor getting a clean sheet in any game is fairly unlikely, so I might just back Saliba just through team quality over Taylor and just have him as the first sub. And then if Lascelles is benched, it's fairly unlikely he comes on at all. And then outside of that, the only other issue really as it stands is probably Darwin, but a bit like you, I'll give him this game week because I've got a ready-made replacement in Haaland coming back in 19. If somehow we become more confident that Turner does start against Bournemouth, I could get a little bit clever and maybe do a 1 week punt on Solanke for Darwin. But I think that just seems like overthinking it at this point, and I'd probably be better off just rolling the transfer in that scenario if I can. So yeah, I think it's probably a goalkeeper transfer, if anything, as it stands. But yeah, I don't think there's too much I really need to be doing with this 11 right now. And Saliba is a decent enough first sub, even against Liverpool away from home. Okay, so Mark's last up.
Yeah, so one free transfer available. I've got the Turner-Johnston combo, which is problematic, but with 1 or 2 game weeks left with this set of players, I probably will just leave it because, I mean, it's Christmas. I'm not going to be, why do I want to make a goalkeeper transfer with one of my last few transfers before a whole new team comes in? So the front 7, I'm happy with. Son, Palmer, Saka, Salah, Gordon. Watkins will probably be captained against Sheffield United, and Solanke is up front. So even just thinking about your teams and what you guys are thinking, you know, there's talk about rolling transfers. There's talk about possible goalkeeper transfers. I'm thinking, where's my opportunity here when I'm wildcarding soon? Where's my 1 week punt or my 2 week punt? And I've kind of always been eyeing up this week as a possible route back to Trippier, but it's obviously fitness dependent.
Yeah.
There's loads of cash in the bank because Haaland's gone. Gabriel plays Liverpool away, which I don't like. And a lot of people will be forced to play their Arsenal defenders this week because of the City blank. So Gabriel to Trippier is a possibility. I could even do Tsimikas to Trippier.
I'd like that. That looks really right. Yeah, a good transfer to make.
It feels like an exciting dead-end transfer for 1 week or 2 weeks before the wild card, and you're hoping then just to spike, a Trippier performance with a clean sheet and 3 bonus or something like that. So I think that's where the most obvious upside is possibly when the front 7's already fine, when I'm not really too bothered. Even if I had no goalkeeper, I mean, I'm not gonna stress too much about that. So I think there's a very good chance Trippier will come in if there's good news on his fitness, etc., towards the end of the week.
Yeah. Fair play. No, it's looking good. And we're all captaining Watkins by the looks of it, which is probably a bit of an ipso facto. I mean, maybe there's some consideration for Son if you're looking to a differential, but it feels like Ollie Watkins is going to guest star as the Haaland replacement for 1 week. Excellent. Well, I think that's your lot.
Yeah, I think it is. And we've nearly gone over an hour and a half. So hopefully you've stuck with us and hopefully you've enjoyed the podcast this week. Thank you all so much for listening. We were Who Got the Assist. As always, you can find us on X at WGTA_FPL. You can find myself at FPL Pricey. And Mark, I believe you're just at FPL General, all one word.
Yeah, that's correct.
Perfect. And on Instagram and Threads, we're WGTA.FPL. And again, I'm just FPL Pricey on there. And again, assuming just all one word, FPL General for you, Mark.
Yeah, nice and simple.
Perfect. Easy to remember. So, thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed the pod, we'd really appreciate it if you could follow us on those social channels. And potentially give the pod a 5-star rating if you're listening in on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever. And of course, if you're watching along on YouTube, if you could give the video a like and subscribe to the channel, that would be really appreciated as well. In the meantime, though, thank you all for listening. And thanks so much for coming on, Mark. Really appreciated you joining the show, and it was good fun chatting.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that, lads. Thanks for I say invite, but I know this just happens every year anyway, and I'm already looking forward to next December. God knows what kind of players we'll be talking about then. But all I'm left to say is keep up the good work, lads, and I hope you both have a lovely Christmas.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Mark, for coming on. All the best for you and your family this Christmas. All the best to Sonny as well. And yeah, we hope you enjoyed the pods. We hope you assisted you. We're back next Saturday before the Chelsea Wolves game on Christmas Eve. I mean, who's going to be podding on Christmas Eve? So we're going to pod the day before. But yes, have a good week, and we'll speak to you very, very soon. Hope you enjoyed.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?